Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by our talented actor and director, Joel Austin. Thank you for being here, Joel.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you.
So, why don't we start by you introducing yourself a little bit? Tell us about your career and a bit about your work.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am originally from the Southeast United States, and that's where I started performing. I did a lot of theater when I was in high school.
Hmm.
I'm a first generation college grad in my family, and the way that I went to college, was through performance. So I was really lucky to discover performance when I did. It kind of got me out of my hometown and helped me, travel and do all the incredible things I've done. I was in Tennessee, which is where I grew up for, the first 20 years or so. And then I started wandering out in the world. I landed in New York, which is where I did a lot of my formal training. I mean, I studied acting a little bit in Tennessee, but I was in like an improv troupe and I did it a little bit as an undergrad, but I ended up getting my undergraduate degree in writing, which we can get back to in a bit. Um, there was a reason I did that. Um,
Why is it?
well, when was studying theater in my early 20s, it just kind of felt, first off, this is no shade intended toward the program I was at whatsoever. It's a
Yeah,
great
okay.
program. It was a great
Uh-huh.
program then. From what I understand, it's a great program now. But that having been said, it did feel a little bit because we were in Tennessee. It
Uh-huh.
felt a little bit removed from the source. We were talking a lot about performances that had happened in like 1972 off
Uh-huh.
Broadway, and we were studying actors who either weren't working anymore or I was never going to see them,
Yeah.
live. I couldn't study them really. And it just felt there was a lack of vitality in it for me. And I noticed that I was starting to get this sort of like disparity between engaging with performance, which was really energizing and
Yeah.
felt like walking on a tightrope all the time. And I loved that. And
Well,
studying performance, which felt not that way. It felt dry. It felt academic. It felt like I wasn't able to put in practice what I was learning in the ways I wanted to. So I moved to writing, and I'm really glad I did because writing, if you want to know a lot about acting, study writing. I would say. Um, so yeah, rest of the bio is I went to New York. I
yeah.
studied formally in New York for about four to 5 years, and worked with some great studios doing mostly theater, and studied I think the studio that taught me the most was Terry Schreiber's studio. He's one of the last great sort of acting teachers of his era. And I was one of his last students, and that was just the honor of a lifetime. And then COVID happened. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've heard of this COVID, but COVID happened, Sophia,
Uh-huh.
and I sort of went through a bunch of life changes at that time, as I think most people did. And I decided New York wasn't the place for me. So I went out to west to Portland, Oregon, which is the exact opposite of New York in many ways, and started doing a lot of film work. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've mostly done film. And as of about, what month are we in? December? As of about 3 months ago,
Mm.
moved to Los Angeles, which is where I currently reside, doing a lot of film stuff here. So there's the bio.
When you said like you're on like a tightrope when you're acting, what do you mean by that?
Well, you know, the way that I engage performance is somewhat methodical in that it begins the same way almost every time, no matter what the project is. I have a
Oh.
system, I hate the word, but the word is process. I have a system
Huh.
that I have worked over time and it works for me. And I just like to do it over and over and over again because it's just a way for me to get up to where I like to start.
Mm.
So that is always the same. And it's comforting in a way that that system is kind of the same. And the reason I think I respond well to that is that I know once you actually go out on stage or once the director yells action,
Mhm.
once the actual performance begins, then all bets are off. And kind of the reason why that is true is because I think generally when we're
Huh.
talking about Western storytelling,
Yeah.
we have a certain set of expectations for what we want to see our storytellers do.
Hmm.
So by and large, we want our performers to kind of accomplish the same goals, even if we're not explicit in what those goals are. We want them to be honest most of the time.
Yeah.
We want to feel like we're watching something that is actually occurring
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
not a simulation of an
Mhm.
occurrence. And the only way to achieve that as an actor that I've discovered is to actually allow it to occur. And so when you get on set, the job is really to be fully present under the imaginary circumstances that you're presented with. So the tight wire act of it is you can do all this preparation, and I am an actor who likes to do a lot of preparation. Do all this preparation, but then when you get there,
Mhm.
it's like anything could happen and you have to roll with it because there's other people who are influencing the scene. There's a light could fall, anything could happen. The blocking could be different than you thought it would be. The scene itself could
Huh.
change dramatically. I mean, I was on set for something yesterday that I don't think I can disclose what it was, but I was on set for something
Mhm.
and halfway through the day, they basically asked me to restructure a major part of my character's intent, which is like intent is everything when you're an actor, right? You
Yeah.
always are working from intent.
Like
And they asked me on
massively.
the fly to, yeah, basically
Oh
like
my God.
shift the entire thing. And that's not the first time that's happened. And like, a younger version of me would have been, I think, been flustered by that. But at this
Yeah.
point, it's kind of like you learn that that's really what the job is. So
Yeah.
it feels like a tightrope because in a lot of ways it is. I mean,
Mhm.
you
You're like
are if
balancing
you're
act.
yeah, you're balancing, you're trying to be vulnerable, you're trying to be present, you're trying to be of service
Hmm.
to your castmates and to your director and everybody else on set, you know. Um, I tend to think of acting as a service job more than an artistic job because when I think of it as an artistic job, it actually makes it harder for me to do it in a strange way. Um, does that
Why
make
is
any
that?
sense? I think it's because when it's an artistic job, you know, artistry is
Mhm.
to me, it's a kind of nebulous concept. It's like artistry to me requires some level of intent, some level of focus, right? If you're sitting down, and I'm not a visual artist, but I'm gonna pretend that I am for a second. If you're sitting down and you're like, okay, I want to paint a painting today, I
Yeah.
would imagine that there is some degree of just freewheeling it and just whatever comes out comes out. And then I would imagine that, through the process of revision, it's sort of like focusing in on what the intent of the piece is.
Yeah.
So acting is different because in acting, there is no external product. When you write a novel, there's a book. When you paint
Yeah.
a painting, there's a painting. When you give a performance, it is you. Like you can be a part of a movie, but that movie is not your performance, right? Your performance
Yeah.
happens on set or
Yeah.
or on stage. So there is no physical product. So the artistry that we engage in, I think, is in a way even more intentional. And so to me, the way to achieve that has just over the years developed into that I'm of service. I'm of service to I mean, usually the script is the bedrock. It's like
Yeah.
whatever the script is, that's the thing that is the highest goal that we're trying to achieve. That's the North Star. And
Mm.
then this isn't always true, but usually that's true. You have improv, which is a different thing, but
Yeah.
um, usually the script's the bedrock, and you're in service of that. And then the second person you're in service to is the director. And then the third person or people you're in service to are all of the cast. And the fourth are all of the crew. It kind of goes in that order. So when you're in service to all those things and you're living sort of in the present awareness of that servitude, it takes your ego out of it, first off, because you are inherently sort of subserviating yourself to all these tiers of people. So your ego is kind of gone, which is good because the ego is a
Yeah.
big problem with acting. And then
Wait.
I think it orients you towards the work itself,
Mhm,
and it makes it more like a day job, which to me is good. It's like
mhm.
I don't see a tremendous amount of difference between what I do and what like a 9 to 5 day job employee does. I really don't. I think there's different language, and there's different techniques and stuff, but when I go to set, I like clock in my head, and it's like, all right, I'm of
Like lock
service.
in, ready to get
Yeah.
into action.
Yeah, I'm
You,
ready.
yeah.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a question. Do you find it different? Have you ever like acted for your own script before that you wrote?
Never. So this is a
Oh.
funny question because I have tried multiple times.
Uh-huh.
I've been directing film, I would say formally for the last like 4-ish years. I've got a project called 15 to Sunrise that I'm actively working on. It'll be going out in the world early next year. It's in the very last stages right now. And I wrote
Uh-huh.
a role in that, expecting that I would play it. And I also wrote a role in this. This is a movie I did called Sarah and the Animals. It's like there's a little mask in here if you're listening,
Mhm.
and then the poster and a little flyer from the production. I also wrote a role in that, expecting that I would play it. Both of these are movies I wrote and directed. And in both cases, we got a month or so out from shooting. We were
Uh-huh.
into pre-production, and I just realized I didn't want to even try to do it because it seemed so impossible. So in both cases, just cast other people.
Why?
I mean, I think it's different parts of the brain for me. I think, an analogy I heard once, I don't know who said it, but it really resonated was when you're an actor, you're in the forest with a machete. You're cutting the trail, right? You are the mechanical one. That's why I don't see it as that different than a service job. You are being instructed by other people and helped to cut that trail, but you are the one it's going through your body, it's going through your personality. You are in the thick of it. When you're
Yeah.
directing, you're in the helicopter above, telling people where to cut the trails and helping them discover ways to make it, better for them or easier for them to cut those trails. And to me, every time I've gotten close to actually doing both, I can't wrap my head around how to do both without one or the other suffering, you know? It's like
I see.
when I imagine that I'm going to direct and also act, it's like, well, how am I going to know if I'm doing well? Am I going to watch the playback after every take? Well, that's going to add 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days to production, and that costs X amount of money. So I can't do
Yeah.
that. So it's like, all right. So I have to find a way to guide myself within these scenes. But then, even when I do that and I let myself play with what that would be like, I end up backing off because part of what is so great about directing is
Mhm.
not knowing what an actor's going to do. So I remove that element of my own enjoyment as a director if I am the one acting, because I know reasonably what I'm going to do. So both times that I didn't do it and I cast someone else to do it, I was glad that I did. And I think about that a lot. I think, am I ever going to act in something that I also direct? And I think it's possible, but I think the circumstances would have to be very controlled in order for me to do it. And they're not there yet.
So like if you feel like it adds like another layer of creativity from the actor themselves, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because, you know, if they're doing their job and I've done my job well casting,
Mhm.
then I'm surprised by what they do. You know,
Yeah.
that's what's fun about it is we get on monitor and we've had I'm not this way as an actor or a director. I don't necessarily like to have in-depth conversations about character on set. I've already had those conversations by the time I get to set if I'm doing the job right. So a lot of actors are kind of like that. They don't want to be talking about backstory while they're trying to actually give the performance. It's too much of a distraction.
Yeah.
So usually you've already
Mhm.
had those conversations and you're already on the same page and you've
Okay.
rehearsed or read it or whatever.
Yeah.
And even though we've done all that work, every time I've directed and I've seen the actors do it in a Zoom meeting or in person in a room or whatever, that's not the same as seeing them in hair, makeup, under lights on the set. It's
Yeah.
very different. Like the pressure is there. That pressure makes people do interesting, surprising things. Um, the 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 aesthetic is different. You know, I know when I'm acting, I can talk about it all day long, but the second I put that costume on or the makeup on and I begin to embody it, something else begins. You know, it's a different process that's no longer intellectual.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't want to, as a director, I don't want to take that element away from myself. I don't want to have to be the one. I don't want to have to find a way to surprise myself to make it enjoyable, and I don't want to have to keep going back and forth between the helicopter over the jungle and in the jungle. Like my brain just can't, so far anyway, it just can't, it doesn't want to do that. It's like one or the other.
Because I feel like every time you have to like if you were acting for your own script, you have to keep getting off the helicopter and keep getting
Yeah.
back, you know.
Yeah.
So
And you know, it's a lot. That's a lot to do while you're trying to make something cool. And when you're a director too, you're also in service. You're in service to the actors. You're usually in service to the DP because they're you and the DP have had conversations about the aesthetic and what this scene is and what that scene is. And it's not like, at least in my experience, it's not like between setups you get to go and like do whatever you want as a
yeah.
director. You're in it. You're with the crew helping get ready for what's coming next or regurgitate what just happened or digest what just happened or whatever. So I don't I see other actors do that and I'm astounded by it. I'm like, God, that's incredible. And I think if I was co-directing, maybe
Mhm.
I could do it, but um it's never happened so far.
So what kind of like thoughts are going through your head when you're like directing people versus like when you're the one acting for someone else?
That's a cool question. Well, so acting, and again, I'm just going to say this generally. I want to put an asterisk right here
Yeah.
for listeners and viewers and all that to just keep in mind that what I'm about to say, I'm specifically talking about Western film, Western theater. I
Yeah.
want to kind of disregard Eastern because that is a different thing with different intent.
Yeah.
So generally with Western film, Western theater, acting when you are in the doing of it, meaning you're on stage in front of an audience or you're on set in front of a camera,
Mhm.
the functional mechanism is active verbs, right? What an actor is usually thinking about, if they've been trained anyway, what they're
Yeah.
usually thinking about is um, what are they what are they actually doing in this moment? Okay. Like here, I'll give you an example. I've got a audition here right in front of me. I don't know what this is for. Okay. I probably can't show this, but all right, there's two characters in this scene.
Okay.
One of them we'll call Tom. That's not his real name, but I'm changing it so I don't get in trouble. And the other
Okay.
we'll call Emily. Tom and Emily. Um, Tom says, I did this for you. This was your idea.
Mhm.
And then Emily says, my idea, all caps, three question marks. Okay. So if I'm playing that scene and I'm playing Tom
Mhm.
and we're on set, what I've done up to this point before we got there is I've looked at this line at least 10 times. I did this for you. This was your idea. And I've assigned to it based off of the work that I did some kind of intent, right?
Yeah.
There's intent on the macro and then on the mid and then on the micro. So in every, I swear I'm going to answer your question, but I'm like walking up to
Yeah.
it. In every scene,
Uh-huh.
there is a beginning, middle, and end, which is a product of rising tension and falling release. Okay. All Western storytelling works on that. Tension, release, tension, release. So the scenes collectively build together to an act, which
Yeah.
also has, in addition to all those little scene rising and falling tensions and releases, the act itself as a unified whole also has a rising tension and then a falling release. This is why writing is so hard. And then the act is bound within a structure, usually a three-act structure, but it can be more,
Mhm.
um, which itself also has a rising up to a peak of tension, then a falling release. Okay. So
Yeah.
it's fractal. The Western
That
storytelling is fractal.
that's so interesting. I was literally just explaining this,
Oh,
like,
really?
yeah, because my dad also writes script, but he doesn't do a very good job. Like, I mean, he's really good at constructing a plot, but he's not good at rising and lowering the tensions in like between the scenes. So I would always come in and like be the one making that happen, and I'm explaining it to him as I'm writing it.
Yeah, it's so hard to do. I mean, and I only know this because I switched to studying writing. Strangely, they don't really talk about it this way acting wise. And I understand why they don't, because it's kind of conceptual, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's hard to get your head around that there are that many layers of storytelling happening at any given moment when you're an actor, and it can be overwhelming,
Mhm.
which is why, if my line is, what was it? I did this for you, this was your idea. And I'm thinking about how that is woven into the dynamics of this scene and this act and this broader story. Like that's a lot of things to be thinking about at the same time.
Yeah.
So the workaround for actors is what's called active verbs. So instead of saying, all right, I'm going to think about where my character is in the story in this sort of fractal tier when I say that line, I'm going to pick an active verb that I'm going to use, embody that active verb, and point it at the scene partner, in this case, Emily. So
Mhm.
I'm going to use the context of the scene and the act and the play or the movie to decide what some of those active verbs could be. And I'm
Mhm.
going to write them down in my script. A lot of acting doesn't matter if you're coming from an Adler background or a Shakespeare background or a Meisner background. There's different terms for how this process works, but the process is functionally the same generally. It's all about figuring out the script, figuring out what the active part, we are actors. Act is right in the word there. Act,
Yeah, yeah.
active verb. Figure out the thing that you are actually doing in that line. So, as an example, it would be, I did this for you. This was your idea. I could say to injure. That's my active verb.
Yeah.
So when I say that line,
It is for
the
you.
only thing I am doing is trying to injure you. I
Mhm.
did this for you. This was your idea. I'm trying to hurt you. Okay.
Mhm.
And then Emily, her line after that is my idea, all caps question marks. She
Mhm.
could then have her own active verb, which is to soothe. And you know it's an active verb because if you put the word to in front of it, or you say I verb you, I
Yeah.
soothe you, I hurt you, it makes sense. If it doesn't make grammatical sense, then it's not an active verb. So she could then say, my idea, soothing, my
Yeah.
idea, she could lean into that. So to get back to your question, what I'm thinking when I'm directing actors, I'm watching for their verbs. And
Okay.
because I'm directing, I'm thinking about the landscape. I'm thinking about how this scene plays into the act and how this act plays into the overall story. And I'm trying to find interesting choices that we can play with that still make sense narratively, but are surprising, What if instead of injuring, um, what did I say his name was? Tom? What, what if instead of injuring, uh, we changed Tom's verb to excite? What does that do? So my directing style is very sort of alchemical. It's very like a mad scientist. It's like we're just playing with verbs. Usually on take two,
Mhm.
you get what is on the page if you've cast it well
Yeah.
and you've done your prep. So takes 3 through 5, if you're allowed to get them, are just like, let's play with the verbs. What were you trying to do there? What I saw you trying to do was soothe. What were you trying to do? Oh yeah, I was trying to soothe. Okay, cool, cool. We got that. Great. I love it as a choice. Let's play. I don't know. This one, try to steamroll him and see what that does. Let's go. So that's what I look for in actors when I'm directing. I look for actors who are playful. Playful
Mhm.
is a good word that I resonate with in both my acting and directing. I look for playful actors, actors who, if they don't already consciously know this process of active verbs, I I can see how they could play within it, They seem to understand it intuitively, even if they don't know it explicitly. I look for that. Um, and then just like, team players, people who like to be
Of
on a
course.
team. That's a big part. And not I would say half the actors I know don't like being on a team. So you gotta you gotta be careful with that one.
That's so interesting. So I actually like had an interview with another like comic creator like right before you, and
hmm
she was talking about how there's like two types of people when like creating a story, developing something. So the one is a gardener who's like kind of has an idea but kind of goes with the flow, and then there's the architect who has like every single detail of every of the plan already like planned out perfectly and just they just follow it like by the book. So what would you say like you are?
I am definitely more of the planner, although I would say I think we're all both. I think I think the trick is knowing what to use when. Like
Mm,
at some point, I've heard this metaphor before. At some
mhm.
point, you do need a tower, right? If you're an
Yeah,
architect and you're building a tower, at some point you do need to build it, right? If you're writing, directing, at some point you have to stop doing drafts of the script and you have to say, this is the script.
yeah,
And you can change it as you go and you can keep gardening it, but there are going to be elements of it that you have to lock down. There just are. And there's no getting around it. So I think we're both. And I think with my directing, I'm more of an no, I'd say this is true with acting too. I think I am an architect. This is a weird way to say it. I'm an architect in the sheets, gardener. Wait, architect in the streets, gardener in the sheets, which
so funny.
means, which means I would like to build the circumstance,
Mm,
what is going to get me up to the starting line. I want to have that fairly consciously constructed. Once I'm in the active doing of it, though, that's
yeah,
when I'm a gardener. That's when it's like, okay, now let's switch gears and be present to whatever is happening and make sure we catch it because what's happening is what's happening. So, you know, your beautiful tower that you constructed might not be what all the unique people who you bring together to build it actually want to create and can
Yeah.
create. So, I think I'm both. I think I've noticed that a lot of people I've had like this kind of conversation with who have been working in some creative field professionally or semi-professionally for some time sort of
Mhm.
end up developing both too, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely have that too. Cause I mean I kind of make comics right now. I'd like to move on to film. Well, it's a bit different because I want to create like an animated film, right?
Very
Obviously, I
cool.
still need to like work with actors like that. Right now, I have a few like line artists and like colorists, and sometimes I send a storyboard and they bring me back my line artist, something like a little different from what I expected, but like I end up liking it, so I don't even change it.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of process is something that happens a lot to people who I think are working actively. You know,
Yeah.
I think it's one thing to sort of sit in your room and toil away on a script for 20 years. That's a very different process than pumping out a movie year after year.
Yeah.
Those require very different mentalities. And so I think if you're actually getting your work done, you know, and
Mm.
you're in my case, you're building that IMDb, there's credits,
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
working like you can't really be too precious about
Mm-mm.
protecting your beautiful construction, you know? Nor
Yeah.
would you really want to, I think, in my experience. Like it's just a general truth, I think, that diverse perspectives and opinions pointed at the same goal make that goal more rich. They
Hmm.
make that end product better. Like
Yeah.
the point of involving other people with different perspectives than you in your work is so that the work becomes better than you,
Hmm.
right? You know,
Yeah.
you want it to transcend you. You want it to be a product of the collective so that it represents all of you because collectively we're all better than we are alone. So that's how I think about it.
You know, I was curious. So you went to school to learn acting and learn writing, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel that learning a certain way to act and a certain way to write affects your creativity?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I think for me it was it's this isn't important for every actor I know, but
Mhm.
for me it was kind of important to drill all the way down into the fundamentals of storytelling so that I could understand what my role actually was, you know? I think we have a really, I would say, toxic perspective on what the job of the actor is in popular culture in this country. We have a really, and I would also say it's ahistorical, meaning we've only really been talking about actors the way we talk about actors now for the last 100 years or so.
What
For
do you mean by toxic?
all, I think it's toxic. First off, actors should not be venerated. I don't think we should. I think the entire idea of putting an actor on a pedestal and attaching market share, you know, to an actor is not only destroys your capacity to do good work in most cases, it also is the exact opposite of how actors have worked throughout all of theatrical history. You know, actors are vagabonds. They're circus performers. They're traveling, you know, think of a Shakespearean troupe. They're a bunch of low life like nobodies who play pretend all day. And that's good. That's what they should be
Yeah.
because I think because you know, the 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 ego is the enemy with acting. So the more fuel you give it,
Hmm.
the harder it becomes to overcome it. And we've just built this culture around our conversation about acting is like married firmly to egoic pursuit. And we talk about actors in ways that are not related at all to the work that they're doing. We talk about them as people. And I just think that that's got nothing to do with how good their work is. So yeah, I think the way that we approach acting as a culture is, I would say, at the very best, it's ignorant of what acting actually is, like what even makes a good actor. And then at the most, it's actively harmful. It's harmful to the audience because they get a bunch of people promoted to them who aren't ready for that kind of attention, and they're not getting the attention in a healthy way, and it destroys those people, and it destroys the audience's opinion of those people, and a bunch of people suffer unnecessarily. If we were just more open about what acting is and what is good acting and what is bad acting, and um, I think I think it would be better. I think it would be better.
I do notice when I like watch Hollywood films and stuff, a lot of actors, it's very obvious, but lots of actors are typecasted.
Yeah,
So I think the whole point of being an actor is supposed to be able to play d many, like an array of types of roles. And it's supposed to be versatile with their emotion. But for example, um, you don't really see like Dwayne Johnson or Brad Pitt ever not playing the tough guy, if that makes sense.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a ton of that. And that's rooted, I mean, what you just said is rooted in something that is not that old. I mean, we're talking about things that started happening in the like 1950s, right? This entire idea of the actor as a marketable personality. Because that's
Yeah.
really that's really what it is. It's not
Mhm.
it's not that there's anything wrong with Dwayne Johnson as a person. I mean, there may be. I don't know him, but
Yeah, yeah.
um, I don't know what that stuff that's coming out about celebrities these days. God knows, but it's not that there's anything wrong with him. It's that the system that he's in that promotes personality above performance
Mhm.
is it serves the interests of the wrong people. I'll just put it that way. It doesn't serve the interests of the actor because it has created a system in which only 0.0001% of actors can make a living at it,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Like there's no variety in actors. You always just see like the same 10 faces over and over again.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's not that way in other places in the world.
Mhm.
Um, we have a celebrity problem in in the West. And I personally see signs that there's a reckoning, and I hope there is. Like, I think the I think the idea of celebrity is something we need to, not just with actors. I mean, I think the idea of celebrity, we are seeing signs, not to get too political or social, but I think over the
Yeah.
last decade, we are seeing a lot of signs where it's like the universe is conspiring to tell us we really need to rethink this idea of like having celebrities, like in any sphere. It's kind of bad for everybody, it seems like.
Well, then I'm curious because it's really hard to get into the film industry these days. How did you like, you know, even get the role of becoming an actor or director? And like how hard was it?
I mean, it's hard. It's hard. And the reason it's hard is because there's no formal path. It's
Yeah.
like you want to become an electrician, you can go to some sort of vocational school or training program or whatever, and then that thing, whatever you go to, has built into it the mechanism where you're going to get employment, whether that's some kind of credential that you get at the end of it, or at the end of it, the last year of it is spent as an intern working for a company that's going to probably hire you. Like there's education, credentialing, typically, I would say in a lot of jobs, companies, some kind of very practical thing where it's like you get this, that leads to that.
Yeah.
Acting doesn't have that. Neither does directing, you
Mm-mm,
know?
yep, I'm experiencing that right now.
Yeah, there's like you can go to film school if you want to become a director. You cannot go to film school if you want to become a director. You can go to a conservatory program like Juilliard or something if you want to be an actor. You cannot go. I mean, there's pros and cons to all of it, but there is no set path, and I think that's part of what makes it hard. And so I try to see things in this weird career path of mine
Mm,
as what's the opportunity that's built into the challenge, right?
mm,
The opportunity of there not being a set career path is that it can be whatever you want it to be.
mhm.
So that's either incredibly alluring or it's not. To
Yeah.
me, it's incredibly alluring. I think it's just like a personality thing. Either you're somebody who really responds positively to like, well, that means
Challenges.
on Tuesday I could be in, you know, London, and then on Wednesday I could be in San Diego, and I'm studying lines on the plane, and I'm meeting 150 new people a year I'm working with. Like either that's something that instinctively, naturally you get really energized by,
Yeah.
or it isn't. So to answer your question, I think yes, it is really hard. And I would say to anybody that's listening, I think it's harder in some ways now to be vulnerable in public than it has ever been because the public access is much greater now than it's ever been.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
not you're not just expected to be an artist. You're expected to be a commodity in your entire life, which is something I struggle with constantly. It's a constant game of like what to how much to reveal, how much not to reveal, how public to be, how it's this constant negotiation. So I
Mm,
think it's harder in that way now, certainly than it was when I was starting. And I'm not sure how I would have managed that as a younger person if I had to deal with it, but I didn't have to deal with that. I was lucky. Um, so that's difficult. I think for me, I mean, there's a bunch of difficult stuff about it.
yeah.
For me, though, and I'll talk mostly about acting here because directing,
Mm,
I don't really consider myself a professional director yet. I think I'm still figuring it out. Like,
okay.
this movie I'm finishing now, it had like 35 people on set and we built a set and it was like to an outsider, it certainly probably looks professional. We flew in actors from across the country, like we did all this stuff,
Mm,
but I don't really feel adept at it enough to speak to it professionally yet. But I do feel adept at acting enough. So with acting, I would say that um, what has been really valuable for me to make it less hard
mm,
is there are things you can control. And the good news is that the things you can control 100%. Um, you can control your relationship to the work, right? You can
yeah.
control how you choose to engage it. You can
Yeah.
control what it means to you. Every morning, I mean, like I said, I've not lived in LA long, but every morning I
Mm,
wake up and I have this morning ritual that I do. And then I go for a run at the same place every day. And
mm,
the place never changes.
yeah.
It's like I see basically, a lot of the same people there, but that's a part of my acting, right?
Yeah.
going there every day and doing that. It's a 7 mile run. Doing that 7 mile run, I
Mhm.
consider it part of my acting. I
How?
consider it, well, so for me, Siri just talked to me. I'm sorry if you heard that. So for me, um, she's talked again. Can you hear
No, I can't.
it? Okay, good. Okay, good. All right. So for me, there's a bunch of technical sort of like process stuff that you do to
Uh-huh.
get ready for a role. But if
Yeah.
you think back to like what I said earlier about what you're actually doing when you're acting on set or when you're in the act of performance, you're playing, right?
Yeah.
You're being playful, you're swapping out intent, you're trying different tactics.
Hmm.
Um, so in order to do that at the highest level that you're capable of, you have to have access to all of yourself.
Hmm.
You have to have access to your entire body. You have to have access to your entire mind, to your entire spirit, your entire heart. You have to be able to feel anything. Because remember what I said earlier, you can't fake it. The secret about acting is that it's not fake. It's all real. You can't, people can tell when you fake it.
Yeah.
So the more real it is in that moment, the better it is most of the time, as long as
Yeah.
nobody's getting hurt. So I have to have a developed space inside of me that I can access at any time at will that is totally open.
Okay.
And the way that I do that is in part by this morning set of things that I do, which involves meditation and journaling.
Oh, I do that too. I was
Good,
just gonna
good.
say that.
I think a lot of creatives have figured out like that's definitely
Yeah, I did
something that
this
we should
thing.
be doing.
Have you ever heard of shadow work before?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
those questions, I just search up like questions and like answer them, but I feel like it really helped me like open up my like unconscious part of my mind, you
What
know?
kind of questions are they?
There's like one, okay, the first question I think is the most useful is like, what are your values? And do the people around you embody those values? And how does that value affect your like actions and like what makes you insecure? What stuff like that really like answers like how you act to things subconsciously, and it really helps you decipher your own mind and all have like more control of your emotions, if that makes any sense.
It does. It totally makes sense. I resonate with that 100%. And so when you're acting, this is how running is connected. What you just talked about, like shadow work, helping you have access to your mind. I read, I think it was in a Joe Dispenza book, but I could be wrong about that. Some book I read or listened to at some point made this claim that really resonated with me, which was that 95% of what goes on in your mind is unconscious. Okay.
Yeah.
And you have no control over it. It's your cells regenerating. It's your dreams. It's all these processes that are happening all the time. And 95% of your brain is busy with that all the time.
Yeah.
And then there's that other 5%, which is like your conscious reality that you do have some control over. So if you're trying to develop a space in yourself that can be emotionally available and free, you have to figure out a way to access that other 95% at
Yeah.
will. You just have to. There's a bunch of techniques for that. For me, part of what that means is that I need a synaptical relationship between my conscious and unconscious self. I need to be able to recognize what it feels like to access the unconscious mind and pull from it.
Yeah.
And I need to have a relationship between those two parts of myself that works for what I'm trying to achieve. So when I meditate in the morning, I consider that as touching base with the unconscious.
Yeah.
and I can feel it. I think most people who have meditated for a long time, there is a physical feeling, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
I can feel it in my body, in my head, in my breathing. My body knows what it feels like at this point to be in touch with it. I hold that feeling. I touch base with it in the morning. I sit there. I have my own techniques, but what I'm actually, I think, functionally trying to do is just touch base with that side of myself. And then when I go run, I purposefully like running for like kind of long distances. 7 miles is my daily, and that's
Hmm.
probably not long for a lot of people, but for me, that's pretty long. Like that's an hour without stopping of running. And
Yeah.
so doing that every day is like some days you don't want to do that. And what's really cool is that I can, by this point, put in some music. And because I have just touched base with that unconscious, I can summon that thing in and live kind of in that unconscious space, which is, if you've never experienced it, it kind of feels like it's slower,
Hmm.
right? Because literally you're accessing different wave patterns in your thinking, and those wave patterns are slower than your conscious thinking. This is why you can't meditate like looking at a phone, because
No.
phones are sending out these really intense wave systems.
Yeah.
Um, and the brain re needs to sink down into these different wave patterns slower.
Yeah.
Um, and I can get there because I've touched base with it, a few minutes before. And I can stay there for long chunks of time while I'm running.
Mhm.
So for me, what this is doing, in addition to that, it just makes me feel really good. Like when I'm done, it's like, wow, I just was out here running for an hour. And I think I was only consciously aware of 20 minutes of it. And that's a cool feeling because it's like you almost check out of the the hard part of the exercise. You almost are like, I'm not really fully present for all of the pain and discomfort that it's causing my body to do this. I'm kind of somewhere else. So it does that. But then also, I think more importantly, it's a synaptical pathway that is being cut. I'm training my body and my mind over time to know how to get down there at will fast and how to stay there. And then when I'm on set or I'm on stage, that's the place I want to be in. I want to be in that void place, that receptive, slow place. That's where I want to be because that's when you have access to everything. That's when you can cry on command or you can laugh, really laugh on command, or you can be fully present for someone else. You can't really do that, or I can't really do that if I'm just in that 5% of my brain. I need more. So running to me is like a part of my acting. Um, Most of my life is in some way a part of it. But I think that's true for most artists. Is that true for you? That you have a bunch of things you would say are part of it?
I'd say for me, I can't like cry on command, to be honest. But I did have a moment when I was writing like an emotional part of my script. I feel like when I write a script, I am also acting. 'Cause like I'm trying to
Yeah.
put myself in the shoe of the character and trying to be like, oh, what would they say? What would like just come right out of their mouth when they're talking in this situation? But I also have to consider like where is the story leading to make sure, Sometimes I have to go back and rewrite it because I'm like, oh, this does not lead to the right direction. But it's
Yeah.
like an organic thing I wanted to say. So I did have a moment where when I was writing it and I just like I started crying because I was getting so emotional because the character in that scene was very emotional. So that was
Yeah.
like it was like a genuine like tear, you know? And a genuine like emotion. So I find it really cool that you can like laugh on command and genuinely cry on command. Another interesting thing I wanted to mention was I I'm like, I really like talking to people and like getting to know people. I'm doing it right now. And
Hmm.
I remember I did a few like mock podcast interviews with like my friends just to like, get into it. So the first one I ever did, I wrote a list of questions, and I remember I just like kind of just said like question after question, but it felt very fake. Like it wasn't interesting at all. It was just boring. I felt like I was just like doing a to-do list. And my friend even told me, she's like, "Oh, that was really awkward and I wasn't really into the conversation." So then like the next two I just did without a script. I did have a few questions, like I do have a few right now, but to be honest, I have not asked a single one of them. So and they said it was a lot more interesting, and I honestly think it's because it's like it's more like, you know, I feel like we're going back and forth, and there's more of a back and forth than being like very one-sided. It's like, it's like a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think conversation is a living thing. I think we kind of undervalue conversation
Hmm.
in the world. I maybe as consumers we value it, but we're not necessarily realizing that's what we value. I think that's why long form podcasts like this are becoming so popular. I think it's two things. First off, it's we live in like an epidemic of loneliness, and when you get to know these podcast hosts and guests over time repeatedly, it feels like you know them, even
Yeah.
though you really don't, but it feels like you do, and that helps with the loneliness. But then too, I think it's what you're talking about, that conversation is a living, breathing thing. Conversation is your whole life can be changed by a single sentence in a single conversation. Your
Hmm.
whole life. And I I try to respect that that's how it works, you know? It's like how many times have I been changed by a thought that I had just sitting around watching TV? And how many times have I been changed by someone else saying something or doing something or something happening? Like change was, for me, it almost always comes from outside. It's almost always something or someone touches something in you that you couldn't really find yourself. And I think, yeah, I think it makes sense to me that you wouldn't want like a long list of questions. I wouldn't either if
No, it's
it
not a good idea.
yeah, it's too prescriptive. It's too planned.
Another thing is that I used to read, I still do, but I read these books like, oh, like, have you ever heard of the book called How to Make Friends and Influence People by Daniel Craig?
I have.
Really, it's a really good book. I'm pretty sure I use all of his points like subconsciously, like all the time. And I think the most important one that really like really switched something in me that made me like a really, really good talker was the point that you have to be genuinely interested in people if you want to have a
Mhm.
good connection with someone. You can't
Yeah.
fake it. Like if you go in talking to someone with a bit of a ulterior motive, it just shows. So I do notice myself when I feel a bit of like a couple days ago, I went out to a brunch with some like I can't explain too much because if this person sees it, they're gonna know it's them. But like it was I went out with a brunch with a couple of people, but like one of them was telling me like how they know about a few famous people, and my first thought was, oh my God, I want to interview them. But I can't say that. I can't be like, oh my God, I want to interview them. So I felt my like the conversation going down a little bit because I started like talking a little bit like a little fake. Like I was trying to get
Yeah.
them to like me, like instead of trying to get to know them, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. And
Yeah.
I mean, you just unpacked a massive challenge in my world, certainly, because I rub elbows with famous people a lot. Like I'm especially now that I've moved to LA, but even before I moved to LA, there was famous people working on things I was working on in my orbit. Like it's something I've had to get used to in the last few years. And I think here's here's something that I'm probably not going to articulate this too well because I'm obviously still working through it, but I think I have changed my relationship to fame. I've really thought about like I've tried to think about what is it that I'm responding to when I
Mhm.
respond to a famous person? Is it that there's something about their work that I deeply resonate with or fascinates me or I'm curious about,
Mhm.
sometimes that's true.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the time, though, it's not that. What I'm actually responding to is something that's manufactured for me to respond to. And
Hmm.
it's like, it's not even usually connected to the person. I mean,
Hmm.
I've had conversations with like famous people who are almost nothing like their personas.
Hmm.
Like they can call it up because it's a character they've played so much. And in many ways, I respect that, if I'm honest with you. I think if I ever was put in that circumstance, I would probably do something similar, I think. I don't think you can ever really know what you would do until it would happen, but
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't happen to me. But if it did, I think I would also probably create a persona because it's the only way you can really be safe, as far as I can tell, is to
Hmm.
like give the world a piece, but not all of it. Because the world's not kind, especially now. So I get it. I get why you would feel that like that conflict of like, oh, now I feel like I have to present in a certain way so I can get close to this person so I can have those interviews.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes sense. I have it all the time where it's like, oh, I'm working on a script right now with so and so who's so and so's brother, and it's like there is a part of you that immediately goes, oh wow, I could really, yeah, that would do a lot for my career if I,
Like that would
but like,
raise me up, you know? So I was
yeah,
like, oh, can I like I remember just like, oh, can I remember I just like immediately asked so that I think that was my solution was just to immediately ask because it just came to my head and I wanted to get it out of the way. So I was like,
yeah,
oh, I really want to interview your friend now. And then she's like, oh. I'm like, yeah. Could you get in contact with her? I don't know if it worked. Um, but I hope
Well,
that
even if
did.
it doesn't, it kind of gets out of the way of the conversation. Like I've been doing this tool or this like skill tactic, whatever you want to call it, for the last few years, where I will call out an intrusive thought and I will say it. Like, if we're having this conversation right now and you say something and it's like I don't know, it reminds me of something that and I can't let go of it. I will just sometimes in conversation just say like, man, this is a stupid thought and it's intrusive and I don't want it to like change the conversation at all, but I just have to say it. And I'll just say it. And then, in the context of what you're talking about, you could be like, oh man, this is a stupid thought. It's stupid. I don't really like it would be cool to talk to this person, but it's just annoying me that I keep thinking about it. So I'm just going to
Yeah.
tell you that a part of me does want to interview that person on my podcast. Don't do anything about it. Whatever. You do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
I'm just getting it out so that it's not between us. Like,
I actually, honestly, I had an intrusive thought like 10 seconds ago when you said famous person. I was like, oh my God, who is it? Can I interview them?
I mean, you can see if you go scour my IMDb, you'll find some people. I think mostly it's just kind of you end up just in the same room as these people working on similar things, or you see them. I mean, I saw a guy who was a part of a very famous comedy trio who have like multiple TV shows and movies and stuff. He was
Can I?
running around the same track that I run a few days ago. And he was wearing a Thin Lizzy shirt, and I love Thin Lizzy. And I didn't recognize him at first, but
Huh?
I was running past him. I was like, nice shirt. And then I looked up at his face and I was like, oh, I know who this guy is. And he was like, oh, thanks, bro. And he kept running. And then we lapped each other so I saw him again and I like nodded and smiled. He nodded and smiled. And like, I guess most famous, famous people I've interacted with are um, pretty ordinary.
Yeah, they're not. They're just. It kind of makes me feel better though when I realize that. But
Yeah.
I do notice that they're all very ambitious in a way.
There's a lot of ambition because it's hard. I mean, if you think about what it takes to um, maintain fame, it's a
Oh, that's so hard.
you have to do a lot of stuff to yourself. to maintain fame. And I think we all know we can think of examples of people who either have not done that work or didn't do it well. And we've seen what fame does to you when you haven't done the inner work you need to do to be okay with it. Um, but I mean, I think, yeah, ambition is certainly something you see a lot because it helps. It helps to have the ambition, I think, because it keeps you from being too inside yourself. If you're too inside yourself and you're too reactive to the messaging that the world is giving you, you might run the risk of starting to believe what the press and the public says about you. And the second you start to believe what those people say about you, you're on a you're on a path to a bad place because they're not always going to say good stuff. Even if they're even if they're saying it now, they won't always.
I noticed that as my so I have a comic. I'm not sure if you've ever read it, but um when I first started it, the comments I received were pretty like mild, you know. They're like, "Oh, nice comic, cool." But as it got more popular and as I got for some reason I'm very popular on Reddit. I'm not sure why, but Reddit like I get like tons of comments and tons of DMs pretty often. And it went from being like mild to like either super positive or super negative. And I found that
Mm.
very interesting. Like they either hated my work or they loved my work.
Did that happen? That happened as you got more popular?
Yeah, as I got more popular, some people would be like, "I'm not sure if you'll ever read this, but I love your comic so much. It's my biggest inspiration." I'm like, "Oh my God, thank you so much." Or,
Yeah.
"Your comic sucks." But the thing is, I find it funny because the second people, I'm like, "I thank you for like commenting me because like I'm getting so much engagement from you guys, all
I
the
know
haters."
that's the great thing about the internet is like hate on the internet is actually really beneficial if you know
It
how to
was
use it.
very beneficial. And then I would just ask, why do you hate it? And they would give me like the biggest fat list. And if you don't know, on social media, the more comments you get, that's the engagement like T. Like, so I would
Mhm.
try to respond to almost every single comment. Sometimes it's impossible because I get too much comments. But when I can, I try. Like when I'm in the bus and I have a free time, I would always respond to a comment because engagement. And man, those haters, they really love going in detail how much they hate you. It's so fun.
Yeah.
And it's
I
not
think
even
that
constructive. So.
no, it's not. I think it's like, I think for a certain personality type that feels like um a rewarding dialogue. Like
Me,
there
it's really
are,
good.
there are people who are in places, and what I'm about to say is very much framed through the perspective of an actor.
Mhm.
It's part of being an actor is it's really hard to judge people when you're an actor because you first off, you can't judge your characters. You can't. So if you do enough acting over time, that sort of bleeds into your real life outside of acting.
Of course.
Um, yeah, you can't judge your characters because if I'm I mean, I just was playing a serial killer, and there's a part of me that, of course, I've never killed a person in my real life. I can't,
Yeah.
I don't, it's, but, but people have killed people,
Yes.
and I'm a person,
Mhm.
which means that somewhere in me, whether I want to admit it in polite society or not, there's the capacity for a killer. Somewhere in me, there's the capacity for all things. I think when you talk about shadow work, something that Carl Jung's work really revealed to me is that, and this was huge for me, is that there is no separation between me
Mhm.
and all human possibility
Yeah.
other than what has been put there by myself or social conditions. Another way to say that is that we all have access to all states of emotional awareness. And so, no, I've never killed anyone. And it's hard for me to imagine that I might be in a circumstance where I will. But I would imagine that most people who have killed somebody didn't think they would do it until they have done it, you know? It
Mhm.
occurs, and then now you are that thing. Um, so my point is that you have to have empathy for the characters you play, or else you can't understand them.
Yeah.
Very, very few people in human history thought that they were the villain and
Huh.
enjoyed it.
Yep.
Most people think they're the hero. Um, so whatever deplorable acts you see on the news committed by whoever you disagree with, whatever it is that they're doing that you disagree with, you're capable of doing too. And the longer you act, the more you live in that awareness,
Hmm.
um, which means that, you know, I can empathize with why someone might leave a nasty comment. I can put myself in their shoes. And what I see is not necessarily the kind of life that I would want to be living, which
Yeah.
makes me empathize with them even more. It's like, I've gotten negative feedback to my work publicly.
Of
And
course.
I think part of the way that I deal with it is, I mean, first off, take the exact same commenter, the
Mhm.
exact same one, and put them in this room with us right now in
Yeah.
this conversation. I would put all of my money on the fact that they're not going to be as vitriolic as they are on Reddit.
Mm.
Why? Because the platforms themselves, I mean, you said it, encourage that kind of engagement.
Yeah.
The person who leaves the comment gets supported and encouraged by Reddit as well. It's not just you for receiving engagement. They also get upvotes. They
Yeah.
also get comments. They also get karma. And like all the platforms are built this way.
Yeah.
So first off, we're not talking about real communication here, right? We're talking about communication that's in a casino, right? It's this machine, if you give it a hate quarter, it's going to give you back this amount of currency. And that one,
Yeah.
if you give it a sorrow quarter, it's going to give you this amount of currency. And none of that is like actual human to human,
Hmm.
totally disincentivized, honest communication.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the first thing that lets me kind of forget about it is like, this isn't real in the same way that you and I having a conversation right now is real. So first off, it's already kind of over in some other space. And then second off, it's like I can have empathy. I mean, I've seen performances. They're actors, I won't name them, but they're actors who I see their films and I'm like, why? I mean, I can summon the fury right now. That's how present it is for me. Why do we keep giving work to these people who
Yeah.
not only are untalented, unfocused, and undisciplined, but seem totally okay with the fact that they're all of those things. When I can throw a rock out my window right now and hit five actors who would do a better job, like that makes
Mhm.
me furious, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's stuff that I would leave comments about too, where it's like, ah, I just can't stand that this person does that actually have anything to do with this person? Not really. It's a whole system built around them. And, it's money and it's attention and it's all kinds of crazy stuff. So when it's pointed at you, it's harder to live in that awareness. But um, if I can find it, if I can find my way there and land on it, well, it's really got nothing to do with me.
Mhm.
Their response to my work is about them. And my work is my work. Like, I get to back to what you can control as an actor. I get to control my work. I get to say what I think is good or bad, what needs work or what really works or what doesn't work. Like that's me. Nobody else gets to tell me that.
Yeah.
Nobody. There is no one who has as much access to my work as I do. And so therefore I'm the ultimate authority on it. No one can tell me I did a bad job. No one. So that's something I try to live into when I get those kind of comments.
Yeah, that's interesting. I every time this reminds me, every time I see some like advice, because I listen to a lot of these like what are self-improvement things you see on
Yeah.
YouTube or you read books, and it's always like they always say, "Oh, do this," but also understand common sense so you don't go like too extreme with it. So for example, you just said like, "Oh, I'm the authority for my own acting and my own work, so no one can tell me what's bad." But at the same time, I think the same way, but I also find myself like, showing my script to like my family or my friends to get feedback. And it's hard to decipher what is true criticism and what is just like someone's opinion, if that makes
Totally. Totally. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the one of the things that I throw in when I'm in that kind of circumstance is, first off, if you don't want the life or experience of the person who is giving you the feedback, then it goes in a secondary category. What I mean by that is if Daniel Day-Lewis
Yeah.
sits down and says to me, "Hey, in act two of that movie, you played this beat this way, and I really think it would have been more interesting and invigorating and alive and electric, and it would have tied into act three better if you played it that way."
Yeah.
I want Daniel Day-Lewis's career. So
Yep,
I'm
yep.
listening to that man. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? If um let me think of an actor who's not working, so this isn't an insult to anybody. If I'm trying to think of like a pretty boy action star from like the 80s, let's say. Um Sylvester
Mhm.
Stallone. There we go. Well, no,
Oh
he's still
yeah.
working.
No.
Um
Who's that guy from Dirty Dancing?
Patrick Swayze.
Is he still
Him.
working?
No,
No,
he's passed away, unfortunately.
okay, you can use
But
him.
someone like that, right? Like an action star who is basically themselves in every movie, and like they make a lot of money, and they are on
Dwayne
all the
Johnson.
GQ covers and all that. If they said that to me, I'm gonna put it in a different category and just be
In a
like, it's
different
not that I'm not
category.
listening.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, you don't, it's clear that we're not trying to do the same things.
Mhm.
So why would I care as much? Because it's not that you're ignorant or uninformed, it's that we're not trying to do the same things. If I'm That's true in every profession, right? Surgeons listen to other surgeons. They don't listen
Yeah.
to dentists.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're all health professionals, but they're different kinds. So there's different kinds of artists. And so part of what I would say in response to what you just said is, first off, like, take things with, it's okay to take things with a grain of salt if the person who's giving you the feedback is not doing the same kind of thing that you're doing, or hasn't achieved the kinds of things you want to try to achieve, or has done the kind of work you want to try to do. Another thing I would say is like, um, validation is a really different thing than feedback.
Oh my God. It's so
Really
hard.
different.
Yeah.
So hard. It's so hard because there's so many people that, like, especially the people we love, we just want to be validated. God,
Yeah.
we just want to be validated. We just want that moment that you wrote in the script, that I'm getting teary thinking about it. That moment that you wrote in the script that made you cry because it moved you so much. You just want to show that to someone you love and have them be moved that much because that validates that space in you. And like, that's a beautiful, precious thing. It's not the same thing as feedback, though. Like, that's something else I keep in mind is you can't you can't work seeking validation because you have no control over if or when that validation will ever come. External validation, I mean, from anybody. You have no control. Maybe your mom that you show it to is, I'm not saying your mom, I'm saying generally, maybe one's mother is like, lost, about to lose her job, and she knows it and you don't know it, and you put that script in front of her and she gets to that moment that made you cry and she just flips the page and you don't see anything happen. And unbeknownst to you, it's because she is not in a place where she can access that emotion, you know? Um, if she could, she probably would, but we're not always able to. So trying to get external validation is a tricky game, especially in art. Like, it's tricky. It's tricky because you have no control. None. So,
Yeah.
I mean, part of my work as an adult, like as a developing in this work, is trying to figure out how to work from places that I can control. And it's funny. I mean, what's weird about it, I've heard other people say this, and it's been true for me the last few years. Um, I go to like a festival or something, and a movie that I'm in is showing. A younger version of me that was very motivated by external validation. When someone comes up after and says, like, God, that performance, that was so good. You were
Yeah.
great. Like, how did you do that? Whatever. And they're really engaged. It's not lip service. It's like they're an actor, they're a director, they're a writer, and they want to know, like, what did you do? What were you thinking? How did you, whatever. They're trying to understand the moves because they want to do it in their work. A younger version of me, that would have been the thing, right? I would have talked about that for weeks. I would have thought about it. It would have been like the, best thing in the world. It happens now, and I almost immediately forget about it. And it means almost nothing, nothing. Because A, usually they're asking because they want to know for their own work,
Yeah.
which doesn't really have a lot to do with you. They're just trying to figure out the tactics that you used if they're like working professionals so that they can use those same tactics. And they see that you have them and they don't, or they're not sure how you did it and they want to learn how you did it,
Mm.
which is again serving them. So service, that word service comes back up again. I think service is a good place to operate from. Um, Service and gratitude. Um, and then, beyond that too, it's like I don't I don't really care anymore what anybody else gets from the work that I'm doing other than the people who are directly connected to doing it. I care what my castmates get. I care what the crew gets. I care what my director gets. I care what the writer gets. The audience, I mean, I obviously want them to engage it
Mm.
because otherwise it just goes into the blackness of, the void of space.
Mm.
And I'm glad when they do engage it, but I get what I want out of it when I do it. I don't get it because of anybody else's reaction to it. And that's been a very like deliberate journey for me. And a few close friends that I've held over these years who are actors. I don't have many actor friends, but I mean, I have a lot of actor acquaintances. I don't have a lot of like close actor friends. I have a lot of close writer friends and close director friends, but not a lot of close actor friends. But the few actor friends that I am close to that I've held relationships over years, they're in a similar place where it's like they made a real effort to detach themselves from the feedback in
Yeah.
like a validating way. And I think it's because exactly what you're talking about. It's like it's just um too it feels too good to be validated
Yeah.
by people outside. It gives the world too much control
Hmm.
over yourself. And like you give that control and it's really hard to get it back, it takes you over. It spreads. So I don't know. That's what I would uh the stuff that I've encountered that's been really helpful for me, you know.
No, yeah, I mean, like I was just gonna say, um, the moment that made me really realize it was when I finished the first half, like the first part of my comic, like fully, and I was like so excited to like show it to, to my dad. But then when he read it, he was like, I don't get it. Like that was the first thing he said. So, but I was so devastated because I was like, and I was so upset because I made him read the script and he said the script is okay, but when he read it as a comic, he said he didn't understand it. And I was so
Oh.
upset because that was like the idea I had since for like, I don't know, 6, 7 years, like very, very, like since a long time ago. So
Hmm.
the fact that when I first finished it and he was the first person I wanted to show it to, and he said he didn't get it, I got so upset. Like I think it like really I think it shifted my brain though in a good way.
Yeah.
To be honest, I take every bad experience as something that's supposed to like be a major turn. So like the more bad the experience, the more good thing will come out of it. I mean, that's what I tell myself.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think you just said something really powerful, which is like if you really believe that the bad experiences are the ones that mean something, it's generally because they're the ones that teach you something, or they're the
Yeah.
ones that help you grow.
Mhm.
And in a way, there's a tremendous amount of power in accepting that reality because what it ends up leading to, Sophia, is being at those film festivals and not caring at all when you get good feedback because you know that that's not going to help you grow.
Mhm.
The good
Yeah.
stuff does not help. I mean, it's nice, but it doesn't do anything for you beyond I know when I leave a scene, I know if I did what I was trying to do. I know if I hit what the director was trying to get me to do. I know all of it. I know it. Yeah, I can feel it in my body. It has a sensation, right? There's a kind of like uh post-coital elation or something to this feeling of emptiness that is like, like you've just like climbed a mountain and you're soaking into a warm bath. It's this feeling of just like release that comes over you when you've done it. Nobody else in the world can tell me if I have that feeling or not. I'm the only one that can tell me. And so, I mean, well, like what happened with your dad, it's like I could see how that would be devastating. I can also see how it could be transformative because it's like, okay, he didn't understand. That's good in a way
Mhm.
because it means, okay, I know where I'm at. I know what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And you could get specific about what that looks like. Now let me learn about his experience and see if I can figure out where I am, where he is, and what skills I need to work on to get from here to there. And that's great because it means you've got work to do. And I think one of the greatest gifts we have as artists, and part of the reason, maybe the reason, above all, that I keep engaging with art, um, in the face of all of the challenges that it brings and all of the uncertainty, is that you will never, ever be bored if you are working honestly, ever.
Yes. Uh-uh.
Because you will constantly be faced with circumstances like what happened with your dad. You will constantly realize, oh man, I really need to work on that. Or, oh, there's a role here that I really want to do, but I know I can't. Why can't I? What is it that I'm missing? What part of myself can't I get into? Is it, a physical thing? Is it a technique thing? What is it? Like that will never end. There's no bottom to that. And if you have to spend your life in service of something, which I think we all do, it, it's a pretty damn good thing to spend your life in service of, constantly trying to get better and constantly trying to do your work better and grow. And I think in a way it's hard to say this when you're in the middle of that kind of disappointment, like what happened with your dad, but in a way, it's like it's good in the end. It's like
Mhm.
it's good that that happened because you will get there. You'll figure it out if you keep trying. And then one day you will put that comic down in front of him and you'll say, look at that, or that script down in front of him. And he'll say,
Yeah.
what about that? And then at some point, however long in the future it is, you'll have figured it out and he'll have exactly the response you want. And you'll probably be bored by that.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good thing that I get like I remember the negative, like the bad experiences more than the good ones because the good ones just means it's kind of just like telling you, oh, you don't need to change this. So like you don't have to think about it. But then when
Yeah.
something bad happens, it means, oh, it's something you can actually improve on. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
something you can, you know. you can focus on yourself and like improve yourself from, while something good is just like, you know,
It's
that's
just a
why it's
thing that
worth.
happens. And I
Yeah.
think that is the work of being an artist is always seeking those things that you can keep engaging that are going to help you grow and be better at what you're doing. And I think the real trick of being, when you asked earlier, like, how do you become an actor? How do you become a director? What challenges do you face? I think what we're talking about right now is the ultimate answer. The ultimate answer, it's probably the same for other artists. I
Yeah.
only consider myself an actor and trying to be an actor, writer, director, but I only really consider myself an actor. Certainly, this is true as an actor, but I've also heard it's true in other spaces. The real truth, the deep down, dirty, ugly, in the mud fighting truth is that what makes someone able to sustain a career as an artist is falling in love with the process of being an
Yeah.
artist.
Hmm.
That's
Not
it,
the outcome.
not the outcome, because the outcome is too unpredictable, it's too uncontrollable, and the things that you have to do to control the outcome turn you into something that makes it hard for you to be an artist.
Yeah.
So it's hard to create something that's honest if you are concerned with the outcome. It's hard, it makes it a lot
Mhm.
harder. So um, that's why we all have to be architects and gardeners. You need
Yeah. And
both.
like people like you said earlier, you can't really fake an art piece. You can't like actually I have a good example for this. I was trying to promote my comic on like every social media platform ever. And at first I was at first I was doing like these random screenshots or like trying to do little trends, but they were doing horribly, like 0 to like 10 viewed nothing.
Yeah.
Then I was like I remember like like I don't know, like it was like the universe telling me or something that like I remembered I used to make these like little short stories, like little short comics that I actually spent a lot of time making, and those were doing very well on TikTok. That's why I have so many like followers on TikTok for some reason. And after I changed it, I got like nothing. So I was like, well, that was nothing. Then I was like, maybe I can try doing that, but incorporate my comic. So like little short comics about my comic, like my main comic. And I spent so much time making those because that honestly gets me the most viewers. And
Mhm.
when I made that, that's when like everything, especially Reddit for some reason, like I get like millions of views from those little tiny short comics that I make. It takes like 6 hours of my day, but I spent a lot. I actually like spent time on it, and actually like I'm proud of it. And suddenly I'm getting views, so I feel like people can tell. Like it made me realize like people can tell when I'm just trying to promote my comic and when I make some genuine art.
Oh
You know?
yeah, I 100% agree. And I think you just opened up a kind of a can of worms that I'm like, I don't talk about publicly a whole lot because it's a little out there. But I agree with you that I think people can tell. And I think part of the reason people can tell is I think that we we can sense in people and in the things that people do
Mhm.
where those actions are coming from, you know?
Yeah.
Like when a 7-year-old child is screaming and raging and throwing their fists around and they're struggling to be around you as an adult without rage pouring out of them. It's really easy for us to go, well, that child just has not developed the tools that they need to be socialized in the world.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we don't lend the same grace to adults.
Mm-mm.
We don't say, well, that guy just hasn't developed the tools. So, I should be graceful with that person and try and help if I can, be of service to them. But my point in bringing that up is like, I think we can sense if we try to see other adults that way, we can. It's just we've been trained not to. And so I think we can sense where things are coming from in people, even if we don't necessarily stop to say, like, oh, this comic that I just saw on Reddit from Sophia is like really honest to me. And I can tell it's honest because it's a distinct style and it's a voice I haven't really seen before. But whatever the thing is that's happening in it is like really interesting to me. And nobody spends the time to really lay all that out,
Mhm.
but they feel it. They feel that genuineness, that authenticity. They feel the presence of another person who's being honest. And I think that there's a kind of, to use like a fancy phrase, there's a kind of transcendent ideal built into being an artist. And
Yeah.
and that is what that ideal is. It's like the deal that you're making is if I am vulnerable and honest and I try and be real with my work in the world, that that will enrich me. I may not know how,
Mhm.
you know, you tactically tried to figure out, all right, I'm going to put this little thing up and it's going to work because of X, Y, and Z. But what actually happened was you put up something that you had done before that you really liked doing
Yeah.
that was like a thing you enjoyed. And then it
Like
took
nothing to
off.
do with trends too. Nothing was trends,
Nothing,
nothing.
yeah. That's not that surprising to me because it's like not to get too like out there, but that in my experience is how this works, how the universe bends around us. Like in a way, we're unique creatures as far as we know
Mhm.
because we're demigods, right? We are we are trapped between manifesting and being.
Yeah, yeah, manifesting. Oh my God. I feel
Yeah,
like I have a pragmatic view of the world. Like, there's no proof that I will. Okay, there's no proof. This is a thing my dad taught me. Is, blow the devil when you see something that's unlucky. But um, there's no proof of me becoming a success. But I'm telling myself that if what I bring out to the universe, I will return. So if I show the universe like this is what I deserve, this is what I've done to prove that I deserve it, so I will get it. I I've conditioned myself. You have to be a little delusional if you want to do some accomplish ambitious things. So I've programmed my mind into believing that, and that's basically how I live my life. So if
yeah,
I if I make my comic, I'm like, okay, I've put my like genuine art into it and my genuine heart into this, so people will like it, and people do like it, and it's like it's like it's kind of like a feedback loop, and it keeps telling me like, yep, it's working, so I'm just gonna keep doing this. If that makes
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think that strikes me as really a great way to live because I mean it's true first off in your experience, right? It is actually occurring that that
yeah,
delusion is creating something that's
hmm
tangible. The version of you who existed before that delusion would never be able to convince the other
mm-mm,
one that it would occur in the way that it will. But that's part of the deal. I think what the kind of space I've been in recently that's been really rewarding is I am trying to be in touch with the one that observes in me. Okay.
hmm
When I go and I look in a mirror, let's say let's say I have a crooked nose, right? My nose is not perfectly straight, let's say. That also happens to be true. So I have a crooked nose and it's a little bit small. And when you're an actor, you're aware of all these things because the world makes you aware. So I know
yeah,
this about myself. My nose is like a little bit small proportionally to my face. It's a little bit crooked. And when I go and I look in the mirror and I look at my nose, I see, all right, there's that nose. And yeah, that nose is a little bit crooked and it's a little bit small for my face. And who who is aware of that?
yeah. I
What
didn't
is
even think. Yeah,
Yeah. What is, okay, so there's me, there's the biological animal self, right? The meat sack version of me. Then there's the mind that's handling all the processes. What is the thing that's paying attention to all of it? What is that? Is that just a product of thought? I'm not so sure that it is, because it
Mhm.
sure looks like when you turn whatever that thing is out onto reality, external reality, you can kind of bend it around you.
Yeah.
And there's, I don't think that it's as simple as I've done a lot of exploration into like the occult. And this is, I have various web entities and things I've worked with in the past that you could go look at. But it's still like a pet fascination of mine. I've read all these books about, and I have done all these practices about witchcraft and, you know, the Golden Dawn and like all this stuff, which, you know, is just aesthetically really interesting to me. When I was a kid, I really loved movies about witchcraft and I really loved like, you know, it was just a world that immediately had like an aesthetic draw to me. Like
Mhm.
when I was a teenager, this movie called The Craft came out and
Oh my God, yes, yeah.
yeah, me as like, you know, little 14-year-old Joel wandering around, that movie comes out and I see these four powerful beautiful women who were like bending the world around them. And it was like, that is cool. That's the world I want to live in, right? So I just have an honest attraction to it. But the more I've read about it and the more I've gotten involved with it, the more it's like, yeah, there is really something true to this idea of there is a self in you. I believe this. There's a self in you that's not in your ego. It's the
Mhm.
one that observes your ego. And if you meditate, you've accessed that thing, right? It's in there.
Yeah.
That thing seems to have a co-creative relationship with reality. And if you listen to that thing and you speak to that thing and you try to have a dialogue with that thing in whatever ways works for you, for some people it's meditation, for some people it's ritual, for some people it's art making, whatever it is. But if you live in the present awareness of that thing and you keep having a dialogue with it and a relationship with it, it's really been true in my experience that synchronicities start to happen, odd
Mhm.
coincidences, things that you can't really explain why this happened or where it came from or why one thing worked and another didn't. But there's just something about engaging that deepest parts of ourselves that makes reality work for us. I don't really know if I would want to put more fine language on it than that, but yeah.
Yeah. It's I agree with you. I don't know how I can phrase this properly, but I feel when you connect with yourself better, the world aligns with you. Like it kind of like the your path becomes a lot clearer, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it. And I think
Because yeah.
go ahead.
So I was gonna say like, man, um, let me know if it's getting too long because I'm enjoying this so much.
I could do another like 10 or 15 minutes and
Okay,
then I
this is
gotta get going.
one last point. When I started like actually like thinking about what I wanted to achieve in my life, and I tried to get like instead of like steps that I don't have control over, I tried to get the most like actionable steps possible. Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna write a script, I'm gonna make a comic. Now, people reading my comic, that part I can't control because I can't force other people to read my comic. But I definitely have control of making a comic. I definitely have control of turning it into like I'm already very content that I was able to create my story that was in my mind for years into something physical, you know?
Hmm.
And ever since I started like being more clear and I'm doing exactly what I want, that's when like people actually start like getting interested in me. even with like my confidence, like when I actually felt like, okay, I'm not nervous at all talking to anyone. Usually because I go to like a billion networking meetings. So that's dead. Social anxiety died in me years ago. But
Good.
that's when I feel like I get the most attention because I used to seek people's attention, but now I don't care. I just talk to everyone like who I want to talk. I don't even talk to everyone. I talk to people I want to talk to. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. That I
Yeah,
feel like the universe opens up for you.
I think it
Okay.
does too. And I think that is I think we're trying to live in that in the presence of that awareness, right?
Mm,
Has been for me the one of the most invigorating parts of being uh, working in the arts, you know? Like our job. I read this great book one time called Art in the Age of Artifice, sorry.
mm,
Um, which is written by one of the two hosts of one of my favorite podcasts, called Weird Studies. If you've never checked that out, highly recommend it. Um, one of the two hosts of it is a filmmaker. He's a documentarian filmmaker, incredibly deep thinker, and also an artist. And he wrote this book called Art in the Age of Artifice. And he didn't come up with what I'm about to say, but this was my first engagement with it. I went on to like read some of the source material for his stuff and other people who have worked even more in this arena. But he one of the things that that book did for me was
mm,
it explicitly laid out a truth, which is, um, I'm going to talk about this within the context of filmmaking because that's the kind of art making I've been doing for the last few years. But replace what I'm about to say with filmmaking with whatever art you happen to be engaged in. When you are engaged in a ritual spiritual practice, all right, let's use a common one. Let's say,
mm.
we're doing this podcast, we're releasing it in the Western world. So let's reference a common Western tradition. Let's say Christmas, okay?
Yeah.
Christmas is coming up. All right. That's a religious holiday.
Mm,
Most people who celebrate it in this country are celebrating a Judeo-Christian version or variant of the holiday. All right. So what does that mean? That means you gather,
mm,
right? You gather people together in a space that you have adorned with the instruments of the ritual: tree, lights, stockings, all that.
yeah.
You have a set series of events that you have agreed on or will be the way it unfolds. Usually this is developed over time, right? Like the way that your mom does Christmas is not exactly the way that you do it with your kids, but it's informed by it. So it's this ongoing thing and it's got a flow to it. It's like we get there at noon, the grandpa watches football while we are putting presents under the tree, and we talk for 2 hours, and then we have dinner, and then we start opening the presents, and then we all put on It's a Wonderful Life, and like we have a system, right?
Yeah.
The idea is that we're doing that because we want to create a reality informed by this ritual. We have an intent.
Mm,
For Christmas, it's usually stuff like family. We have an emotional awareness we want to live in. We want to live in the emotional awareness of family. We want to take that nebulous thing, family. What does that even mean? That's a crazy, what is that? But we want to push it through our bodies by way of the setting being the right way and the system being set up and what we do being the same way. And then we want to create family so that we can live in the awareness of it or
mm.
whatever value it is that you're talking about. All of that, which we could call a Judeo-Christian tradition, ritual, is the exact same thing. That process is the exact same process as art making. It is the exact same. Okay. Follow me. You
Okay.
start with a nebulous idea of a
Yes.
state you want to achieve. In your case, it's an inspiration for a comic, let's say, something that's like you have a vague awareness of what it is. You have a general idea. You feel it somewhere down in there,
Hmm.
but you're not totally sure yet, like family.
Yeah.
Then you have a set of adornments, you know. For me, it's a set. Like, there's people around who do X, Y, and Z. There's certain ways a set functions. For you, it might be the space that you go to draw or whatever. And there's ways you
Honestly,
like to have.
right now, I feel like it's
Yeah,
happening.
yeah, yeah. So that setting, the decoration is the next thing. You
Mhm.
go, you have the inspiration with the vague idea, you go to the decoration, you have the tools, you have the system. You even have built in both of these things, what we call words of power. In Christmas, it's words like Christ, Santa. These words don't mean anything. They don't reference anything that is tangible. I can't touch Christ. I can't
You touch
touch
on.
Santa,
Yeah.
but it's a word of power, right? I say it and you know what I mean without me having to explain it.
Yeah.
And you say it and I know what you mean. In art making, filmmaking, action is a word of power, right? What does that
Yeah.
mean? I mean, it does have a meaning. It means whatever the action was, let's do it now because we're ready to record it. But we don't have to explain that. it's it's transcended. It's just now it's a word of power. You have the words of power. And then all of this in both cases is meant to take a nebulous idea of a feeling of something and
Mhm.
bring it into a real thing. At the end of the process, you have the comic. That's the thing. That
Yeah.
the product of the process. I have the film. That's the thing. We have the experience of family. That's the thing. When I encountered that, it was mind blowing to me because it made me realize that religious or spiritual systems and art making are the same thing.
They go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand. They're pointed at the same goal, too. The goal in both is to try and access something transcendent. It's to
Mhm.
try and touch something that makes us more or reminds us that we're more than just this mundane reality,
Yeah.
right? We want to be in relationship with a savior ideal, a Christian ideal, a God. We want to be in a relationship with something that's bigger than us because it helps us have meaning in this life, which makes this life bearable. Same
Yeah.
thing with art. We want to transcend and be in touch with something outside of ourselves, bigger than ourselves, because it gives us meaning and it makes this life bearable. When I encountered that, it was life changing because it suddenly all the work that I was doing
Mhm.
was not suddenly it was deadly serious. It was no longer like this is a hobby. It was like, no, this is a way of being.
Yeah.
I'm a priest in this, I have chosen to live my life in service to this. And that's a serious, I mean, if you're not trying to get like egoic external validation from it, it's
Yeah.
pretty damn serious to be an artist. Like you're making stuff that will, if you're successful, influence people's realities. That's serious business. That's, we all influence people's realities all the time, but most people do it passively and without intent and without realizing they're doing it. To decide that you want to spend your life doing it actively,
Mhm.
that's that's a serious thing. Like so that that book was a big deal for me. It helped me like all the self-help book stuff you're talking about. It helped me realize how important what I was doing actually could be if I like allowed it to live in a different place in myself. This has nothing to do with the world, by the way, nothing to do with the world's response. I don't care what the world thinks about what I do and how I do it. This is just how I engage with it. And putting that much seriousness on it, that much weight on it, makes it a lot easier to go run. It makes it a lot easier to do 7 auditions in a day. It makes it a lot easier to get up on that stage, even though I know I'm 20 pounds heavier than I was a few months ago. It makes it a lot easier to, you know, um, work with that person who I'm struggling to connect to. It makes it a lot, all the things, it makes it a lot easier to engage with social media. All the things that I personally struggle with about this work, living in the present awareness of the seriousness of it invigorates me. It drives my passion to keep doing it. So um, I think that to me is one of the more powerful, important realizations that I try and live in the shadow of every day if I can.
Do you have any final things you'd like to say to our listeners?
I mean, I would just say like I assume that the people who are listening to this sort of show would consider themselves creatives, maybe even artists, which to me the only difference between someone who's creative and someone who's an artist is that an artist is intentional with their creativity. Like everyone is creative. The only
Yeah.
difference is artists are intentional. So if you consider yourself intentional with your creativity, congratulations, you're an artist. You've just graduated from art university. Um, so I I would say if you consider yourself an artist, especially, or what I just said made you realize that you are one. Um, I think what I would want, the last thing I would want for people to listen, if they've gotten this far in this conversation, would be you are so important. Like, you are so important. What you have to say, the way you have to say it, there's not been a single creature in the entire history of the universe, and there never will be ever again, that can say the things you can say and the way that you say them. You are singularly important. You are more important in your artistry than all of the things that are stacked against you because you are singular. You are a, a, a star that never existed before you and will never exist after you. And that means, in part, what you're trying to do matters and you matter. And keep going. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Joel. Um, where can people find your work?
You can find me at Joel, Joel, hyphen, Austin, like the city, AUSTIN.com. There has all the links to all the things.
You can also find him on IMDb because,
I am there. Yeah. I'm on some
famous.
of the socials as well.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you so much for listening and thank you so much for being here. This is an amazing conversation. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow storytelling enthusiasts. And if you have any questions or topics or guests you'd like me to interview, please leave them in the comments, or you can connect with me on any of my social medias on at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.